Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good evening, everybody. Okay, so today we will be taking a look at the Jīvaka Sutta. Jīvaka Sutta. This is Sutta number 55 in the Middle Length Discourses. It's on page 474. Okay, and this sutta concerns the rather maybe partly controversial topic of vegetarianism versus the allowance to eat meat. And the sutta takes the form of a conversation between the Buddha and a lay disciple by the name of Jīvaka Komara Bhacha. Who is this Jīvaka? Jīvaka Komara Bhacha. He was the personal physician of the Buddha. He was one who was trained in the Indian system of Ayurvedic medicine. This is a system of herbal medicine. It said that he was actually born as the son of a prostitute who, when he took birth, she couldn't be burdened with bringing up a child, and so she placed him someplace in the bushes or by a stream. And then some of the serving ladies of a prince came to maybe wash clothes in the stream, and then they discovered this little baby by the stream, and so they brought him to the royal household, and he was adopted by a prince. And then when he reached maturity, he went, according to the commentary, he went to a university in the city of Takshila. Takshila is now in Pakistan, but in those days it was considered part of the larger Indian subcontinent. And this was a kind of center where people would go to study different subjects. This idea that he went to study in Takshila might be anachronistic, perhaps that means out of proper time sequence. It could be that in the age of the commentaries, Takshila had become something of a university. And so when anybody went to study anything, they would go to Takshila. More likely, Jīvaka just went to study with a local master of herbal medicine. And anyway, he became so extremely skilled in medicine that he was able to cure virtually any kind of illness. It said that when he had finished his studies and his teacher was giving him his final exam, his test, the task that was set to him as his final exam, he was to go out into the woods and the fields and look at all of the different herbs, all the different types of shrubs, bushes, tree barks, and if there was any that he found that didn't qualify as medicine, he was to bring it back to his teacher. And so he went out into the fields, the forests, looked everywhere. Then he returned to his teacher empty-handed. And so the teacher said to him, "Why are you coming back empty-handed? You were supposed to bring back anything that you found that could not be used as medicine." And then Jīvaka said, "I went out and I looked all over, but whatever shrubs I saw, whatever grasses I saw, whatever plants I saw, everything that I saw could be used for medicine. Okay, so Jīvaka was brought up as the adopted son of a prince, I think it was the Prince Abhaya, who was the son of King Bimbisara. And at a certain point when the Buddha came to the royal palace, then Jīvaka was impressed by him and became his disciple. And then Jīvaka, from that point on, would look after the Buddha, and he would take care of the Buddha, take care of the Sangha, the leading monks in the Sangha. Okay, so in this sutta, Jīvaka goes to the Buddha, pays homage to him, sits down to one side, and then he asks him a question. He says that he has heard this report, that this is the report, they slaughter living beings specifically for you, for the ascetic Gautama, and that you, the recluse Gautama, knowingly eat meat prepared for him from animals that are killed for your sake. So this is a report that he's heard, but he doesn't simply accept it. He wants to find out whether it's true or not. So then he says, do those who speak thus say what has been said by the Blessed One and not represent you with what is contrary to fact? Do they explain in the correct way, in such a way that nothing would provide a ground for censure? Nothing that provides a ground for censure can be legitimately deduced from their assertions. Okay, so then the Buddha rejects this proposition. He says, those who speak thus do not say what has been said by me, but misrepresent me with what is untrue and contrary to fact. Okay, so now what does the Buddha himself teach? This comes in paragraph 5. He says that there are 3 instances in which meat should not be eaten. That is, when one has seen, heard, or otherwise suspects that the living being has been slaughtered specifically for oneself. Actually, there's a technical term for this. I think the sutta uses this technical term. Yeah, the technical term is tikoti parisuddha. The parisuddha means pure, ti means 3, and koti means literally point, but we might say aspect. So food that's pure in 3 aspects. And that means that the meat, one has not seen the animal being killed specifically for oneself. One has not heard any report that the animal was killed specifically for oneself. and one doesn't have any ground for suspicion that the animal was killed specifically for oneself. Okay, so in these three cases, the Buddha says, the meat may be eaten, or in the following three cases, the meat may be eaten when it is not seen, not heard, and not suspected. That is, that the animal has been slaughtered for oneself. I say that meat may be eaten in these three instances. Okay, now this point might be a little bit surprising for people who have maybe superficial acquaintance with Buddhism, since one often supposes that Buddhists are always vegetarian. But in the Buddhist traditions, which adhere very closely to the original Buddhist teachings, vegetarianism is not required. Now, this might raise the question, why is it that the Buddha did not require vegetarianism? Okay, one reason is that, at least this might be offered as a reason, that in ancient India, the monks would go on alms round. They would go from house to house with their bowl, collecting whatever people offer them. And there would be times when people would prepare dishes that would have meat in it, and they would put these dishes into their alms bowl. And so the sort of ideal standard that is held up is to eat whatever has been offered to one without making any distinctions, without any discrimination, without picking or choosing. Okay, this seems to be a kind of explanation, except that there was one religious community which was a rival of Buddhism. This is Jainism. Very similar to Buddhism in many respects. There was an ascetic community, it centered around an ascetic community of monks and nuns who would also live by going on alms round. And yet the Jains were strict vegetarians. Not only the Jain monks and nuns, but even the Jain lay people, according to what I've read, were expected to observe vegetarianism. So the argument that monks would go on alms round from house to house and just collect what is offered doesn't seem to be a satisfactory explanation. And also, if that was the complete explanation, then one would expect that on occasions when the Buddha and the Sangha were invited to houses to receive meals, it would be understood that they would not accept any meat products, any foods prepared with meat. But in fact, as we will see in the continuation of the sutta, the Buddha and the Sangha did receive offerings of meat when they would be invited to the houses for meals. It's sometimes said that the last meal that the Buddha received consisted of something called sukara madhava, which means, literally, sukara means pig, and madhava could mean either, it could have two meanings, either what has been crushed or trampled, or else what is soft and delicate. And so different interpretations are advanced. What was the Buddha's last meal? Some who want to argue that the Buddha must have been a vegetarian, say sukara madhava could not be a meat product. It must be something like a kind of mushroom that pigs like to eat and so they would go to the woods and dig up these mushrooms. And then others say this is not the case. Sukha or madhava must have been the tender part of a pig. In other words, it was a kind of pork dish. Okay, and so the argument goes on about around the Buddha's last meal to try to use that as a basis for determining whether or not the Buddha observed vegetarianism. But this debate is a little bit irrelevant because there are other suttas in which the Buddha is shown being invited to a house and being offered a dish that's very clearly a meat dish, and he accepts it and says he will accept it. Okay, so from this we could see that the Buddha himself was not a vegetarian, and he didn't make vegetarianism obligatory. There were only this particular ruling which lay down the conditions under which one was not permitted to accept meat. That is, to repeat, if one has seen an animal being killed for one's sake, if one has heard some report that an animal has been killed for one's sake, or one hears the squeals and screams of an animal being killed for one, or one has some other ground for suspecting that an animal has been killed to prepare one's meal. But if there is meat or fish which is already coming from an animal that's already dead, what's called meat that's on the market, and then one accepts that meat dish and one eats it, then it's not in any way the transgression of the precepts. Okay, so in the countries that follow the early form of Buddhism, that still follow the early form of Buddhism, vegetarianism is not compulsory. For example, Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia. In these countries, people are not vegetarian. Not as a rule, they're not vegetarian. And the monks are not necessarily vegetarian. In Sri Lanka, I found that almost the only animal food which is regularly served are dishes made with fish, not from other animals. Sometimes chicken is served, but dishes made with other forms of meat are not generally served. And in Sri Lanka also I found that many monks are vegetarian, not because they're obliged to be by the rule, but they make a choice to be vegetarian. When I was living in Sri Lanka, actually the first few years I was observing vegetarianism, but because at that time there was not another good source of protein, my health started to deteriorate, and then it was suggested to me by a doctor that I reconsider and that I accept fish, which I did. After I came to Bodhi Monastery, then I became a full-fledged vegetarian, and I've been for the last 7 years now. I have to express a personal opinion, maybe from two angles. One is that I find it rather, I don't want to seem to be arguing against the Buddha, but I think if one considers the long-term consequences of the allowance for monastics or even for the lay disciples to eat meat, okay, one could look at it from different angles. From one angle, it permitted the spread of Buddhism to other countries where, for example, Jainism, because of its insistence on vegetarianism, could not spread. Buddhism spread to Tibet. In Tibet, there's hardly any vegetable food growing. And so in order to obtain protein, the people and the monks as well have to eat meat. And so very reluctantly, they allow animals to be killed, and they eat with a feeling of a sense of remorse, but they recognize that it's necessary to obtain the protein. Buddhism spread to countries like China, where the monks and nuns observe vegetarianism. Okay, but the negative side is that by allowing monastics to eat meat, it created a situation which permits animals to be slaughtered not specifically for the monks, but allows them to be slaughtered in a larger number in order to provide meat dishes for the monks. Okay, in a country like Burma or Thailand, there are thousands of monks, maybe even 100,000 monks. And because meat dishes are considered a necessary part of any kind of offering to the Sangha, so large numbers of animals get slaughtered in order to prepare these dishes to offer to the monks. Generally, in the Buddhist countries, Buddhists themselves don't do the slaughtering of the animals. But it seems to work out conveniently that in these countries there are minorities, non-Buddhist minorities, particularly Muslims, who then take on the trade of being butchers, so that most of the butchers are Muslims. And then along the coasts, there are communities of Christians, particularly Catholics, who work as the fishermen. And so in this way one gets supply of fish from the Catholic fishermen and other meat dishes from the Muslim butchers, and then people will buy this and prepare many meat dishes to offer to the monks. If vegetarianism had been required, then these animals they're not being killed specifically for the monks, but still the quantity of animals being killed in order to have meat available for people to buy to make offerings for the monks, that quantity of animals would be much less, or so it seems to me. Okay, let us anyway see how the Buddha develops his case for permitting meat eating. Okay, he gives an example here, we're in paragraph 6, of a monk who's living in dependence on a village or town, which means he's supported by the people in a village or town. And this monk dwells pervading the whole world with a mind of loving kindness. So he develops the meditation on loving kindness. Okay, then some householder or a householder's son comes to him and invites him for the next day's meal. The monk accepts. Okay, so the next day he goes to the house to which he's been invited, and then the householder serves him with delicious alms food. Okay, now the monk, this delicious alms food presumably would include meat dishes. And so the monk doesn't think that it's good that this householder is providing me with this delicious alms food, and he doesn't give rise to the wish, may he provide me with delicious alms food in the future, but he uses this food without being attached to it, without taking delight in it. He eats it mindfully, understanding the danger in attachment to delicious food. Okay, so now the Buddha asks Jīvaka, he says, would that monk on that occasion be choosing for his own affliction? In other words, would he have any intentions to be inflicting harm upon himself? Or would he have any intentions of inflicting harm on another being? Or would he have any intention of inflicting harm on himself or others? And Jīvaka replies, no. And then the Buddha says, doesn't that monk sustain himself with blameless food on that occasion? Okay, then Jīvaka says, yes, that is the case. And then Jīvaka praises the Buddha for abiding in loving kindness. Okay, I just want to pause at this point. And does this seem completely cogent reasoning to you? What do you think? Yeah.
I think that maybe what he's trying to put across is the idea that that a monk should see food as more medicine than something that would give pleasure.
Yeah.
Something to be attached to.
Yeah. Anybody have any? Yeah, Suki.
Actually, I thought about this, and also in conjunction with the Sutta 50 that we studied last week.
Yeah.
And to me, whether if for a monk or any kind of practitioner who is striving to become free,
Yeah.
whether it's need or not need, is not that important.
Mm-hmm.
The state of mind, he said,
Yeah. Yeah.
is very important. What the wholesome.
Yeah.
When you know the two kind of thoughts.
The wholesome thoughts and the unwholesome. Yeah.
The wholesome meaning you have no affliction.
Yeah.
You're free.
Yeah.
So instead of picking, do I have a need? Those are already like giving you affliction. You beyond that.
Yeah.
So whatever, so the state of mind is more important.
Yeah.
Than the material itself.
Yeah.
So which actually applies to when the Mara
Yeah.
forced the Brahman
Yeah.
to become nasty, and then they go to unhappy destination.
Right.
When he forces the Brahman to be nice.
Yeah.
Then they go to
Yeah.
happy destination.
Yeah.
So it's not a matter of what is the cause, what is the psychological importance in there. What's important is your mind.
Yeah.
At the right now.
Right. Yeah.
That's
But,
the practice.
okay, so you say what's important is your mind, the state of mind. It's not so important the food itself, which is just a material thing.
Right. So but let's say there are two people. One is very concerned about not eating meat.
Yeah.
Thinking about all those killing and stuff.
Yeah.
And you pick all the meat out.
Yeah.
It's like attachment. Sort of there's a clinging
Yeah.
to sila. It's almost like a sila paramasa. applies that. Then there's another person. Your mind is not in the food.
Yeah.
But so your attention is not there.
Yeah.
Your attention is elsewhere.
Yeah.
So those people are more free.
Yeah.
That's the way I feel.
Okay. Does anybody else have any idea about this? Let me play Mara's advocate, or it could be advocate from a different point of view. Doesn't one have to consider the consequences of one's actions, which are not immediately visible? And so, I mean, this is a point that I alluded to earlier. If one chooses to accept the meat dish, that gives the encouragement to others to go to the store to order the meat. If others go to the store and order the meat, that sustains or at least contributes to the continuation of a meat industry, which involves the slaughter of animals to provide the meat.
To me, it's very Western psychological kind of interpretation.
It's a kind of what?
It's a Western, like a intellectual kind of tradition, which goes deeply into psychology of others.
But you say it's a Western psychological way of viewing the situation.
Yes.
But you pointed out the difference in the psychology between the person who is able to eat the meat without having any kind of unwholesome thoughts.
Actually, not the psychology. What I see, my practice actually applies to that. It's like when you're happy,
Yeah.
and you're doing whatever you do,
Yeah.
you can't solve everything in the world.
You can't what?
You can't solve everybody else's
You can't solve
problems.
everybody else's problems.
Right. When
Yeah.
you're happy,
Yeah.
free of affliction,
Yeah.
then you're doing okay.
Yeah.
When you like a certain action, when you have to decide certain actions,
Yeah.
I kind of remember the wholesome and unwholesome.
Yeah.
And then I just check, is it beneficial to others, beneficial to me? And then I check, does it make me happy?
Yeah.
But if it doesn't make me happy, that's kilesha, which will bring, that is defilement is the base for unhappy destination.
Okay, I have to ask you to be concise with what you're saying, otherwise you're giving a whole lecture here.
So, rather than, instead of thinking of all the sources, all the consequences,
Yeah.
it's the person, you are the person
Yeah.
at the moment.
Yeah.
Do you have a conflict in your mind at the moment? Then don't do it. If you don't have a conflict, if you practice it just only going for a certain place,
Yeah.
then that's good.
Is everybody willing to accept her point, or does anybody have any argument against it? Yes.
I'm just looking at the question here. Would that bhikkhu on such an occasion choose for his own affliction?
Yeah.
I get hung up on or for another's affliction. I don't know if you mean the other, the one who's serving.
No, I think it would. I think it would be referring to other beings.
Well, the question would be yes.
Excuse me?
The question would be yes.
You mean the answer would be yes?
Choosing for the affliction of another being.
Okay, so you're saying that when he accepts the dish of meat, then he is choosing or intending for the affliction of the other.
Who is afflicted by that?
Yes, Peter.
If the monk is thinking, and we can assume giving appropriate body language to, he's not thinking how good this food is, and I hope he serves it to me in the future. I recall hearing that it's a vinaya offense to even tilt your bowl towards a dish that you like when you're receiving food. I heard this.
I don't know if that's the case.
In giving any body language of
Yeah.
indicating one thing or another.
Yeah.
So if the monk is not feeling any preference and not giving the impression of any preference, the person serving the food could think, as you suggested, oh, well, the monk accepts the meat, so I'm going to make sure I offer meat in the future. The person offering could also think to himself, the monk couldn't care less what I fed him. I could feed him something less expensive next time.
Yeah.
The person offering is acting based on his own feelings, his own thoughts, and his own projections.
Yeah.
Whereas the monk is not encouraging or discouraging one way or the other.
Yeah. So it's completely left up to the choice of the Jīvaka, the one who is providing the food, the householder who is offering the food. Okay, now the monk is not showing any preferences. He is just accepting whatever is offered. He's one who has practiced during the early part of the day. He's practiced loving kindness to all beings in all the directions. With this calm, loving mind, he comes to the house, he accepts whatever is offered, and he eats it with equanimity. No preferences, no discrimination. Okay, but now the householder, he goes to the market, and he wants to offer something he considers good food to the monk. And so he will order meat foods in order to prepare what he considers, what in the world is considered excellent food. He might have the impression that if I offer vegetarian food to the monk, that would be something cheap, low quality. Seriously, I'm not joking. I mean, in the worldly way of thinking, except among people who are vegetarian or health conscious, the meat dishes are considered high quality, excellent food because they can be made very tasty, delicious way. Whereas vegetarian food, except amongst those who are very skilled in preparing it, would be considered just ordinary, bland fare. So he wants to prepare something tasty, delicious. So he'll go to the market and buy a variety of meat dishes and then he'll go to the market, buy a variety of meats, and then come and prepare different meat dishes. So when he buys the meat, even though he's not ordering the animal to be killed, is he intending for the harm of others in some way? Can we present that argument? After all, by making that choice, okay, Faye says by ordering the meat dishes, he's encouraging the slaughterhouse to continue to kill more animals, to provide more meat. One situation occurred to me that might occur with modern marketing. It wouldn't have occurred in the Buddha's time, but let us suppose that, I'm not sure whether this actually takes place, but just suppose we have a supermarket. What is it, Stop and Shop? Is that New Jersey? Do we have Safeway here, or is that... No more. It's got... When I was in graduate school, we always used to go to Safeway. Okay, they have now the labeling on the foods, on the packages. Okay, so you go on a Thursday, suppose, to the market, you buy a package of chicken, you go to the clerk just seems to put the data into the machine, or he runs, actually, doesn't even type in anymore. He just runs that barcode across, and maybe this registers on Thursday a package of chicken, so that next Thursday, so that it's adding up the quantity of packages of chicken sold on a Thursday, so that next week they'll be able to provide to have the same number of packages of chicken available to ensure that they'll meet the demand for packages of chicken. And so for next Thursday, they will have to kill a chicken to have that package available to meet maybe the demand of somebody else. So even though when one buys the package of chicken, one is not ordering, kill me that chicken to have the package, but the instructions go into the data bank and it comes out as an instruction for next Thursday to have a corresponding package of chicken, and then for an animal to be killed, the chicken to be killed. I'm not sure if this is done. It's just a purely hypothetical, a pure hypothesis. Yes, Mary?
Well, I don't know exactly how it's done, but that consumption then drives an industry, at least here in the West,
Yeah.
that is geared around producing all of this meat.
Yeah.
And it's done in a way
Yeah.
that is often very cruel
Yeah.
to the animals that are being raised for
Yeah.
consumption.
Yeah.
So it's not just a matter of killing, the animal,
Yeah.
the food,
Yeah.
but it's also the whole the practice of raising meat for slaughter and the
Yeah.
conditions.
Okay, so one could say that even though one is not intending for the harm of a specific animal on a specific occasion, but by ordering the meat, even on one occasion or if regularly, one is supporting a whole industry which thrives on the production of animals for slaughter. And Suki, what do you have any argument against?
It's not argue, but when you look at the whole thing in the world,
Yeah.
it's like the war. Can you stop the war? All those
Can you stop the what?
war?
The war.
Can you stop all those hungry children and all the same thing?
Yeah.
All that matters, but we do whatever we can. But really, the most important thing, each one of us
Yeah.
have a happy mind. Happy mind.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of things we're talking about is kind of a perception, kind of thoughts in our head.
Yeah.
Just thinking about all those, past and future things.
Yeah.
Which sometimes, a lot of times, really doesn't change that much.
Mm.
But if each individual have really, that's why in this sutta and the previous sutta, always it comes back to Brahma Vihara. Somehow it's injected in here.
Yeah.
It seems to me.
Well, let me use a counter argument. I'm not taking any sides in this issue. I'm just presenting counter arguments just to show that one could look at this from different angles. For many years, apartheid was practiced in South Africa, a very cruel, oppressive policy by the white ruling class would discriminate in very cruel ways against the great majority black population. Okay, then ethically concerned individuals in the West pondered, what can we do to protest against this policy of apartheid in South Africa? And so they began pressuring American companies not to invest in firms that did business. But they pressured American companies not to do business with South Africa. And then this spread to other countries, and individuals would not invest in companies that did business in South Africa. And so this put a big dent in the South African economy. The South African economy declined, deteriorated, and then this gave an opportunity for those organizations in South Africa that were working against apartheid to eventually overthrow or replace that regime with a new regime. It was de Klerk, Frederick de Klerk, was that his name? Who was the president of South Africa, who saw from this policy of divesting from firms that did business with South Africa, he saw that the tide is changing and it's time to release Nelson Mandela from prison. He was released from prison, and then that set in motion the forces which brought an end to apartheid and the whole system of white rule in South Africa. And so in this way, individual choices, though they might seem quite infinitesimal and almost ineffective if we just take them individually, but if we bring together a mass of individual choices, then they can constitute a very powerful social force. Okay, Peter?
I'm wondering if there's any example of the Buddha encouraging his followers to take an action or abstain from an action for the purpose of influencing other people's behavior on any topic. The teachings seem to be, as in this sutta, always focused on the individual and his own mind.
Yeah.
And his discussion with Jīvaka seems to just be about, is this bhikkhu doing anything wholesome or unwholesome in that moment?
Yeah.
And the discussion
I think that
goes into, well, is his behavior encouraging wholesome or unwholesome behavior?
The Buddha did make an allowance. It comes purely within a monastic framework, though it also involves lay people. This is if there is a lay person, a householder, whose behavior is detrimental to the Sangha, somebody who disparages the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, who tries to drive monks away from a monastery, who does other things which are detrimental to the Sangha, then the Buddha gave the allowance to the monks to what's called turning over the bowl, which means they can pass by that person's house with their bowl. They could be holding the bowl out, and then if the person wants to make an offering, they turn the bowl upside down. And so in this way they refuse to accept the offering from that person. And then that will have the effect of, or at least it should have the effect of changing that person's behavior. And this has had an important consequence in very recent times in Burma. This was actually the method that was used by, maybe it's still being used, though with a great deal of fear, by the monks as their way of protesting against the autocratic military junta that rules Burma. They would refuse to accept offerings of alms and other gifts from the generals and their families. And they use that term, turning over the bowl, even though it might not be a case of going to the house to receive anything. But just refusing to accept the gift is the sign of protest. Does somebody else have some comment? Yeah.
Bhante, I was going to say, the South African analogy is quite different, though, because in that one, the world clearly saw that that was an immoral situation.
Yeah.
And with pressure from the West and other countries, South Africa was economically boycotted.
Yeah.
Vegetarianism is a personal belief.
Yeah.
I don't believe it's held by the vast majority of the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so to boycott a Stop and Shop or an Acme, stop an immoral act.
Yeah.
Except
Yeah.
the person.
Yeah.
And Buddhists
Yeah.
can choose to go to health food stores or
Yeah.
vegetarian
Yeah.
co-op.
Yeah.
But to apply economic pressure is not the same.
Be careful. I hope that I'm not setting off a husband-wife conflict here, because I see your wife has her hand up there.
I am thinking that maybe individuals who objected to how the industry, the meat industry,
Yeah.
was conducting business had an influence on cruelty-free products. So there were individuals who
Yeah.
campaigned to make a change in the meat industry. So although vegetarianism might
Yeah.
be, not a good example of how an individual choice
Yeah.
change,
Mm.
a trend.
Yeah.
In some way,
Yeah.
there has been, as a result of individual choices and then organizing,
Yeah.
a change in
Yeah.
the industry that provides meat for.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I want to continue to finish the sutta. Okay, so we're in paragraph 7. Okay, then the Buddha continues here by showing what, from his point of view, is the important factor. That he says, any lust, any hatred, any delusion whereby ill will might arise, that has been abandoned by the Tathagata, cut off at the root, and so on, utterly destroyed. So I think the point of this is that the Buddha himself is one who has completely eradicated all of the roots of evil. And so he cannot make any pronouncements of a rule or an allowance that might stem from greed, hatred, and delusion. Okay, what we have in paragraph 8 to 10 is just a continuation using the other 3 members of the 4 Brahmaviharas. This is compassion, altruistic joy, equanimity. The rest of the passage is very much the same. But then we come to paragraph 12. Okay, here the Buddha is going to show how, under what conditions, one would be creating or generating unwholesome karma. Okay, if anyone slaughters a living being for the Buddha or one of his disciples, he lays up much demerit in 5 instances. He's going to break this act of killing up into 5 different stages, each one of which generates unwholesome karma, or what's called demerit. Okay, now the key to understanding this, and I think the key to understanding the whole issue of meat eating, prohibited or allowed in Buddhism, is the factor of volition or intention. So what is one's intention? What is one's choice or will in a particular situation? So here, the Buddha takes the case when first one gives the order to go and fetch that living being. Don't forget, we're living, the Buddha is living in a society in which there are not supermarkets where one goes to order, goes down the aisle and picks up a cellophane-wrapped, plastic-wrapped parcel package with meat in it. But there would be little stalls or shops which do the slaughtering of animals. Okay, so if anybody gives the order, go and fetch that living being in order to bring it for slaughter, even just by giving that order, one creates demerit. Okay, then when the living being is being pulled and dragged to the slaughter place, then one is creating demerit. Even though one might not be doing anything new, but just the fact that the living being is being pulled to slaughter, that is reinforcing the demerit of the original order. Okay, then when one says, go and slaughter that living being, that act of giving the order, this is the third situation that creates the demerit. Okay, then when the living being is being slaughtered and is experiencing pain and misery, okay, that's the fourth stage of the situation when one is creating demerit. Okay, then when one takes the meat food that one has obtained by giving that order, and then one serves it to the Buddha or to a disciple, that is the fifth case in which one is creating demerit. Okay, so then the Buddha sums up by saying, anyone who slaughters a living being for the Buddha or his disciple lays up much demerit in these 5 instances, or at these 5 stages. Okay, when that is said, then Jīvaka is impressed. He says it's wonderful, it's marvelous. Then he says that the monks sustain themselves with permissible food and with blameless food. And then he's shown as going for refuge to the triple gem, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha.
I found paragraph 12 to be kind of confusing, because why would it be? It seems to imply that it's only demerit in the case of whether it's slaughtered for the Tathagata or his disciples. Since the Buddha teaches abstinence from killing, it seems to me this would be demerit in any case.
Of course. But he's... I think he just brings up this situation because the whole conversation was started over the issue of what kind of food is allowable to be served to the Buddha or his disciples. But certainly anybody who orders a living being to be killed is making demerit, whether it's to prepare food for the Buddha or not.
Okay, so you think the specifying about for Tathagata or disciples is just tying it into...
Yeah, that's just because it's the subject of the conversation. And here, the Buddha has to clear up the doubts of Jīvaka. Yes. Yeah, what is your name again? Gary. Carrie.
So he seems to be saying that the person who goes through these 5 stages
Yeah.
of buffering the meat is going to generate, it's going to have demerits.
Right, yeah.
But the monk who receives is,
Well, if the monk knows that the food has been killed, that the animal has been killed specifically for him, then he's obliged to reject that food. Then he's not permitted to eat the food. Because then the food will come under one of the 3, it will meet one of the 3 conditions under which the Buddha says the food is not permissible. If you go back to paragraph 5, he says there are 3 instances in which meat should not be eaten when the text uses shorthand, when it is seen, heard, or suspected. That is, when one sees, hears, or suspects that the animal has been killed, especially for oneself.
But in either case,
Yeah.
the person offering the food is subject to demerit.
In either, what is the?
But whether he was slaughtering an animal for a monk
Yeah.
or not,
Yeah.
doing it on general principles,
Yeah.
he's subject to demerit.
Yeah, he's subject to demerit if he kills the animal to make an offering of food for the monk. Then he gets demerit because he's killing a living being, and then he's killing a living being to offer either to the Buddha or to a monastic disciple of the Buddha, probably knowing that that's not allowable. And so he would be trying to, you would say, almost trick the Buddha and his disciples into accepting an offering which he will know to be not permissible. So do you see some problem there still?
I was just sort of thinking about the conversation you just had with the fellow here in front of me. We were talking about demerit is generated just by the killing of a living being.
Yeah, just the killing itself generates the
Whether it's for the monk or not.
Yeah, the killing in itself generates the demerit, but then it becomes, there's another source of demerit from offering the food prepared from an animal that has been killed, that one has had killed oneself, to offer that food specifically to either the Buddha or to a monastic disciple.
So in a funny way, it sort of argues for vegetarianism.
No, because it is permitting meat foods to be offered if the lay supporter obtains the meat from an animal that has been already killed. He's not either killing the animal himself or ordering it to be killed.
None of these 5 stages.
It doesn't go through these 5 stages, and it meets the 3 conditions.
It's interesting, the point that you raised much earlier about the meat foods are considered higher class foods, and if the monk accepts it, the layperson might be inclined to think, well, the next time I'm going to have monks over, I'm going to go do this. It's interesting that this paragraph 12 seems to address that specific case,
yeah.
That the Buddha is saying ahead of time, well, you may think to yourself, well, the monks eat it, so I'm going to go get it next time I know I have monks over. And then he says here in this case, if you do that, you're racking up demerit in 5 ways.
No, not in neither case does one get the demerit if one purchases the meat, say, on the market.
But I wonder how common that, was the expectation that was something that could be done back then?
I think that would be readily the case.
With lack of refrigeration, I would think most meat purchases would be fresh meat.
Because offerings of meat are mentioned quite often in the Vinaya. That's the collection on monastic discipline. And so the text mentions certain kinds of meat which are not allowable. Like offering of dog meat is not allowable. The meat from wild animals like tiger, I think elephant, lion. And then I remember cases of a person who has invited the Sangha to come to her house for a meal, and then she's quite anxious and eager to purchase some meat in order to prepare some delicious dishes. And so she sends her servant to the market to look for meat. And then in the Vinaya, in the Patimokkha, there's a rule about types of delicious, what's called panita bhojana, delicious food. And the delicious food includes meat, fish, and then things like yogurt, milk. Okay, so meat and fish are included in that category of delicious foods, which are things that one is not supposed to ask for one's own sake. Anybody else have anything to say? Okay, now I should explain that over time in India, Buddhism did come to largely adopt vegetarianism. That could have come about perhaps through the influence of Jainism, because the Jains were the strong rivals of Buddhism. The two religions or spiritual teachings were very similar in many respects. And Jainism, it never achieved the degree of popularity that Buddhism achieved, but it did, in certain periods, have a strong influence. And the Jains were strict vegetarians. And so the Buddhists could have come to feel under a pressure to adopt vegetarianism. And then particularly with the rise of Mahayana Buddhism, and then the advocacy of the Bodhisattva ideal, and the emphasis in the Bodhisattva spirit of great compassion. And so I think Buddhists reflected on this issue themselves, and then considered, if we are to practice compassion, can we eat meat? Would that be in accordance with the spirit of great compassion? And so then in later texts, like the Mahayana Sutras, we have a strong advocacy of vegetarianism. And then it was these texts which were transmitted to China, Vietnam, translated into Korea, translated into Chinese, and then these provided the basis for the adoption of vegetarianism, at least by the monastics, so that in Chinese monasteries, most Vietnamese monasteries, Korean monasteries, are they strictly vegetarian?
Changing a little bit.
Changing.
With the import of Southeast Asian vipassana meditation, it's changing a little bit. But Mahayana tradition, yes, strictly vegetarian.
But the Mahayana monasteries still remain strictly vegetarian.
Could I add one little thing? Not with no, it seems to me this matter, monks eating meat, always comes up and kind of becomes point of argument a lot
Yeah.
of times.
Yeah.
It really seems to me it needs a wise skillfulness depending on the situation. And Bhante
Yeah.
he's, as you know, vegetarian. In his monastery, it's all vegetarian.
Yeah.
And while I was following him, a lot of people always watch him, see what he's eating and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
So one day I asked him about this matter, because of, about what do you think of vegetarianism, and he said it doesn't have to be vegetarian, but if everybody follows Dharma, because I do vegetarian, and if people respect me and follow Dharma better because I am a vegetarian, why not? That's what he said, and I respect it very much.
Wait, say that. I'm not quite sure that I caught the point.
He said,
If everybody
yeah. Learns Dharma better,
yeah.
because I eat.
Was this in Korea?
No,
In
it doesn't have to be in Korea, but
yeah.
because everybody seems to expect monks
Yeah.
because he eats vegetable, then why not follow vegetarian?
Okay, so that they would respect the monks better because they're following vegetarian diet,
A lot of people.
and then that would encourage them to observe.
I thought that.
I would say this is an interesting case or argument because now, maybe in the United States, maybe in countries like Korea, which have a long tradition of vegetarianism, people expect a person who's leading a life of renunciation, a monastic life, particularly from an Asian tradition, to be a vegetarian. And so if they see him eating meat, then they think, he's not really leading a life of renunciation. So that could be an argument. Though people might have said the same thing about the Buddha. What is he doing? Eating? Yeah. And people, even in Sri Lanka, who don't know the allowance that the Buddha gave to the monastics to eat fish and meat, so often there used to be letters to the editor in the Sri Lankan newspaper. What are our monks coming to these days? I went to a temple a few days ago, and the monks there were eating, with their lunch, they were eating meat. How corrupt the Sangha is becoming. And then invariably, a few days later, there would be a reply to that letter from somebody knowledgeable who would say that the writer of that letter has misunderstood the Buddha's teaching and tried to correct him. But it would not be a permanent correction because the next week or the next month, somebody else will write the letter to the editor complaining, what are our monks coming to? Anybody else have anything to contribute? Okay, so we will end for the evening, and next time we will take the next sutta. This is the Upali Sutta, Sutta number 56. In this sutta, we actually see an argument between the Buddha and some representatives of the Jains. It's something of a puzzle that the well-known historical teacher of Jainism, not the founder, but the best-known historical teacher of Jainism, Mahavira, was a contemporary of the Buddha, and they traveled and taught in very much the same parts of India, in the state of Magadha, Bihar, Kosala, and yet they never met each other, never had a chance to exchange words. But some of the disciples of Mahavira went to the Buddha and tried to debate with the Buddha. And so this sutta records one of these debates. Okay, so let us end with the dates for the next meeting. March 14th, 13th, 12th. It's March 10th. And the Tuesday after that, the 17th. Okay, we will end with the sharing of the merits. I hope we got merits today. And Okay, we share the merits with the devas, the deities, the bhutas, the spirits, the nagas, asking them to protect the Dharma, to protect the world, to protect ourselves and others. All living beings, including the animals and the fishes. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodhantu